Hello and welcome. I'm Excellent and this is my channel. And today we're going to talk about some strange kidnappings. Before I get started on these, if you would please give this video a thumbs up, I greatly appreciate it. And if you are not subscribed and you would like to be, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. And when you do, if you click on the bell, you'll be notified when my content goes live. And leave me comments below. Let's have a conversation. Alrighty, let's get started. Kidnapping has been a thing for a very long time, but according to the Smithsonian, ransom notes are a fairly new addition to the whole process. In 2013, a librarian who was going through some family records stumbled across an incredible piece of history. She found America's first ransom note. It had been addressed to a man named Christian Ross, and it demanded that he pay the kidnapper $20,000 for the return of his son Charlie. Now, in 1874, accounting for inflation, that amount equals about $500,000. The whole story is heartbreaking from the fact that it was a brand new police department and they had zero experience in kidnappings or anything remotely similar. Then add the con men who came out of the woodwork and the quote-unquote spiritualists who tried to screw the family out of money and help them find their son. And in spite of the fact that more than 500,000 people, think about that, 500,000 people participated in the search efforts for Charlie, his mother and father never saw him again. And from then on, kidnappings proceeded to get more popular. Easy money during the times of a depression. So let's talk about some of these kidnappings that are particularly strange. J. Paul Getty was officially named as the richest man in the United States in 1957, and it's not entirely surprising that the Getty family became a major target for kidnappers. Fast forward to 1973, and Getty grandson J. Paul Getty III, who was already known as something of a wild child, when his mother got a phone call one night in July, she learned that he'd gotten the attention of the Italian mafia. The true target of this kidnapping, the richest Getty of them all, wasn't that concerned. And let's explain this with a not so fun fact. When J. Paul Getty's youngest son died from a brain tumor at the age of 12, he couldn't be bothered to go to the child's funeral, so it's not surprising that he refused to pay the ransom for his grandchild. 4 months went by with the 16-year-old Getty in captivity. That's when things got, well, bloody and violent. His captors cut off his ear. They put it, along with a lock of his hair, in an envelope with a ransom note that read, "This is Paul's ear. If we don't get some money within 10 days, then the other ear will arrive." In other words, he will arrive in little bits. Getty was released a month later and was ultimately disowned by his family because he turned to a life of drugs and alcohol to cope with what he'd been through. He was partially blind and semi-dependent on a wheelchair after his kidnapping and mutilation. He died in 2011, and he was only 54 years old. The 1980s were a different time. Some might say a special time. And Ursula Herman's parents didn't think anything of it when their 10-year-old daughter was riding her bike home from her cousin's house at 7:30 p.m. And yes, that's exactly what it was like. She was alone, of course, but it was just a 10-minute ride. So, what could happen? And honestly, I don't think our parents even conjured up the idea that something would happen. She never made it home, and by the time they were out looking for her a half an hour later, she'd completely vanished. I was surprised that they were looking for her within a half an hour, honestly. That was September 15th, 1981, on a Tuesday. It wasn't long before neighbors in their town of Ecking, Germany, were all out looking for her, but they found no trace. Then, on Thursday, something unsettling began to happen. The Herman's house phone would ring, and when it was picked up, the only thing that was played was some jingle that a local radio station would play before their traffic bulletins. And then the caller would hang up. It kept happening. And then the ransom note showed up the next day. It said that the kidnappers would call and play that jingle, and her parents were to say that they were or were not going to pay the ransom. When the next phone call came, they agreed. But it was too late. She was found 19 days later, where she had been buried in a small box. It was stocked with a little bit of food. There were some holes in it for ventilation, but there was no circulation. And it was estimated that she had died just a few hours after being buried. In 2019, her family was still struggling to get closure and to see justice done. When the industrialist Baron Edouard Jean and Penn was kidnapped in 1978 from just outside of his parents' home, it quickly became clear that his captors weren't very concerned about him being comfortable. In fact, for 63 days, he was starved, he was regularly beaten, and kept chained in a dark room. When he first disappeared, there were all kinds of theories about the motivation. Although most people thought it was simply about the money, and the Penn family had plenty of it, as they had built the Paris metro and railways across Africa. When the ransom note came, not only did it contain demands for an amount of money that would be equivalent to about $60 million in today's economy, but it also contained Penn's little finger. This one has a bit of a weird ending. Well, not that they haven't already. And it started when the law enforcement ambushed one of the kidnappers after they promised to hand over the cash. One Elaine Kalal was able to bargain with his own fellow kidnappers to arrange Penn's release, and afterwards he personally reached out to his victim to apologize. And Penn forgave them, but by this time his name had been dragged through the public mud. Less than admirable parts of his life, like the fact that he was maybe having affairs, became public knowledge, and he was described as a completely broken man when he finally died in 2018. And the last one for today. In 1927, a well-dressed man strolled into Los Angeles' Mount Vernon Junior High. He was described as dapper. He had some horrible news, though. Local banker Perry Parker had been in a terrible car accident, and he was requesting that he see his daughter, Marion. School officials found the 12-year-old girl, and they handed her over to the man, and then they disappeared. When her twin sister returned from school alone, it was quickly obvious that something had gone horribly wrong. 2 telegrams showed up almost immediately, confirming that she had in fact been kidnapped. The ransom note appeared the following day with demands for $15,000 in gold certificates, which today would be worth about $250,000. 2 more ransom notes followed, and one postscript was from Marion herself, supposedly, in which she wrote, quote, "Daddy, please do what this man tells you, or he'll kill me if you don't. Your loving daughter, Marion Parker. If those were her words, they were her last words. Her father handed over the cash, and Marion was kicked out of the kidnapper's car as they sped away. But when her father went to pick her up, he realized that her arms and legs had been removed. Later, the coroner discovered that she had also been completely disemboweled and filled with rags. Her eyes had been sewn open. He estimated that she had been killed just 12 hours after her disappearance. A former employee of Perry Parker's, William Edward Hickman, was arrested and convicted. He also confessed. Thank you for coming today, and good night.